Welcome, Hoosier fans, to this week's edition of Assembly Call Radio, where each week we discuss the most interesting topics in the world of Indiana basketball. This is our 179th edition of Assembly Call Radio, and it is our 634th episode overall of the Assembly Call, recorded on the evening of Thursday, July 23rd, 2020. I am your host, Jerod Morris. And let's begin this edition of the Assembly Call how we begin every edition of the Assembly Call, and that is with our Hoosier Proud banner moment.
And Indiana is the national champion.
When it comes down, Indiana will be champion.
Smart takes the shot.
The Hoosiers have won the national championship.
This week's banner moment occurred for me on Tuesday when I read Archie Miller's Q&A with Seth Davis from The Athletic. I, of course, would have preferred that this Q&A be with a local reporter who could have asked more insightful questions like Alex Bozich or Zach Osterman, or heck, how about another round with the Hoosier Hysterics? But given Archie's general aversion to public commentary, we will take what we can get. And there were a few interesting nuggets included. The headliner was Archie saying, quote, "We have 90% of the team coming back and a good class coming in. We have a chance to really contend this year," unquote. Questionable math aside, given that Devontae, Duran, Demezi, and Justin are all gone, it's obviously encouraging to hear Archie so upbeat about this group's prospects. But there were a couple other sections that stood out even more to me. One was Archie talking about changes he made to his physical health, including getting back to his playing weight and challenging himself to go 1,000,000 feet in 2020 on his VersaClimber. He also discussed getting better at channeling his urgency and anger after losses and making sure there is a, quote, calmness to it. And you can tell that he generally feels more aware and comfortable with what life is like as the head coach at Indiana and what he needs to do to handle it. All in all, to me, these sounded like the quotes of a still young coach who is maturing and figuring out what really matters. It's not X's and O's, but it will help him be a better leader through the grind of a 5-month season. Well, knock on wood that there is a season. All right, now let me introduce my esteemed co-host for this week's show. To my left.
You'll have fun. Fun. The Hoosiers make the tourney again. Fun.
Easy to enjoy watching guys enjoying themselves.
Andy, what is your bottoms line on the last week in Indiana basketball?
Man, I can't believe you took that last one. That was me saying that, making fun of Ryan for saying that. It's terrible. I was gonna say that it was glad to have you back, and we were joking before the show that a lot of people were, and by a lot I mean really just a couple, but some people were wondering, where you've been. We're glad to have you back, and as I said before the show, no one is more glad that you're back than Coach and I, as we can just sit back and spout off opinions instead of having to man the multiple internet windows and programs and different things like that.
The whole reason I left was to try and force Ryan to host. So you're saying that didn't happen the entire time I was gone?
Your absence was not long enough, apparently, for that to happen.
Come on,
but
dude.
Yeah. So anyway, no, glad to have you back. Not a lot going on. We'll give some positive vibes to our friend Chronic Hoosier, who has been under the weather and had some tweets about his situation last night. So thinking of him, hope he's doing well, feeling better today, and glad to be talking a little basketball. It's like you just kind of every week try to get yourself to feel continue to feel optimistic as things go, and more sports are starting, so that's helpful. Baseball starting up as we're going now. NBA is getting close, so at least it's something to watch, and hopefully the NCAA can learn some lessons from those things, even though many of them will probably be hard to apply in a college setting. But, if there's any hope that those can get going, maybe the NCAA can learn something from that and give us a college basketball season at some point. I know I'm holding out hope just like everybody else is. So excited to talk a little Archie Miller tonight.
Well, no organization learns from others and its own mistakes like the NCAA. So we're in good hands, I'm sure. All right. To my right.
He remembers the days when a movie cost $1. Heaven help you if you ever decide to pop your collar. Play hard, but remember, fake hustle is a crime. He's the coach and it's Tonsoni time.
Richie just fell off the bar stool laughing.
Coach, it's Tonsoni time. What's on your mind?
Well, first of all, it's good to have you back, Jerod. We missed you, and it's a lot easier to sit down here and not have to push all the buttons and the start up objects and all that stuff. So glad to have you back. The thing that I'm thinking about is how great it is to get back on campus for the Indiana basketball team. I know things are abnormal and the protocols are different, but this week they started out basketball workouts. And you heard that if you read Archie Miller's interview or saw the interview with Talia Goodman, that you could just feel he was excited about seeing what the team can bring next season. And when you're a coach, you're always excited. Usually that happens in your spring with the returning players. And then after a small break in the summer session starts in early June, and you start getting those guys for the whole summer. And it's been a long wait for Archie and his staff. It's been a long wait for us. And even though we don't get to know a lot about what went on, it's nice to know Christian Lander, Trey Galloway, Anthony Leo, Jordan Geronimo are now with the Indiana program along with the returning Hoosiers, and they're starting to work towards next season. We all worry about what's going on and if there's a season in it, but the bottom line is they're starting to work. Let's hope they stay healthy and don't have to shut down for any period of time. But that's exciting to me at this point in this situation that they're back working on basketball.
Absolutely. All right, so this week we will go through a few Hoosier headlines, and then we are going to spend a lot of time talking about Archie Miller, and then we will get to your questions. All of that coming this week on Assembly Call Radio. Before we get to all that, real quick, as we always do, we want to urge you to continue to support our friends over at Home Field Apparel, homefieldapparel.com. You can always use your promo code Assembly20 at Home Field Apparel for 20% off your entire order, but you should also follow them on Twitter, because I think it was today, they tweeted that either Friday or Saturday there's going to be like a Christmas in July sale. They teased it. So
I think it's actually tomorrow. They talked about on the 24th, a Christmas Eve in July sale. So
okay, Christmas Eve in July.
My wife has taken my wallet and credit cards from me just to protect myself from such an event.
I mean, it's insane. All the new schools that they're coming out with. Obviously, they've got all the IU gear, but there may be a member of your family that goes to another school, or maybe like Coach, you just like collecting college gear, or maybe you just like a logo of another school. They've got so much incredible stuff there. Go to homefieldapparel.com. Use that promo code Assembly20. Coach, how are you not going bankrupt with, just shirt after shirt after shirt that they're putting out?
Well, we had this basement wall about fall in on us, which is going to take a few thousand. So I got to save for that. That's the only reason I'm not joining in this new Saturday, 15 shirts in 15 weeks, but it looks good. And you don't have to be a fan of these other schools. Sometimes you need shirts to, go mow the grass in, and you want to look good in case, the neighbors drive by. But no, it's hard for me to say no, especially when he's already got the credit card information. All you got to do is hit submit. But I appreciate what he does, and I appreciate that he's an entrepreneur. As a teacher of economics, I use him as an example quite a bit in trying to be creative and start up a business, and so it's always good to follow.
And he's a Hoosier.
I also enjoyed the other day, he, as part of their subscription, you can put in list of schools that you don't want. And someone had put in an Ohio State University in there as one of their responses. So I appreciated that as well.
Yes. Okay, guys, a few Hoosier headlines. Jordan Longino, he made his decision. He is I think a 4-star wing from Pennsylvania. You guys will be shocked to know that he chose Villanova. So he is the second highly rated wing from the state of Pennsylvania to choose Villanova over Indiana. I've just got to ask myself what this guy is thinking. Who in their right mind from Pennsylvania would go to a moribund program like Villanova and Jay Wright when you could come to, to a school that hasn't played an NCAA tournament game in 4 years?
Makes no sense.
I kid, but the question is, and I want to ask you guys a serious question about this. Are we wasting our time recruiting guys like this? Obviously Bruiser Flint has a lot of connections there, and if you land one of these guys, it would be really big. But do you think maybe time would be better spent elsewhere? Do you think that this is a reasonable use of resources and we should be taking our shots? And look, we got Jordan Geronimo from out east. Maybe we'll land one of these guys.
Yeah, I think, you got to yield a little bit to the staff that knows which ones are the ones that are actually in any way realistic to go after. And I think
he did have a connection. I think his mom went to IU. So
I believe that's true. And there's a part of it that they've really, they set out to do, really lock down the borders of the state, focus on Indiana. They've done a good job of that. I think there is a certain point though, where you've got to prove that you can do more than that, but you kind of need to pick your spots and not really, take your eye off the ball in terms of that. So I think as long as they're being selective about some of those things. But I mean, yeah, you can sit back after the fact and say like, well, why in the world did anyone ever think that, a talented guy that's getting recruited by Villanova, who's from the state of Pennsylvania, would go someplace else? But I think it's okay what they're doing now, because it seems to be more targeted as opposed to casting a wide net there, and you're finding guys that you make some kind of connection with and see what happens. Because I don't think you want to set yourself up to be somebody who looks like they're so narrow-minded on where they're looking for players that that ends up getting used against you. So it's kind of like you got to dip your toe in the water at some point just to be out there. And as long as you're selective enough, it seems okay.
In Archie's defense, there are probably other fan bases that are being like, oh, good, we went after a kid from Indiana and he went to Indiana. Why did we waste our time with that? So at least Archie has brought us back to that point where we're landing the kids from our own state. So
I'm not sure it's a waste of time, because we're not throwing 80-some scholarships out there and spending all that time. And a lot of these guys Indiana's finishing second, third, so the message is being heard. Yeah. And it's hard to overcome the local team that has had a lot of success and won national championships. But when you're coming in third, or the top 3 or the top 5, and some kids from Philadelphia who should be going to Villanova just because it's there, that says something to me, and that then is worth the time too, because that might set or plant a seed in someone else saying, hey, these other kids have Indiana in their top 3, top 5. I'm going to listen the next time Archie comes. So it might not be worth the time, because this kid was probably going to go to Villanova, but it's a process. And again, we have a base, and then we're reaching out to see, instead of the base changing from the south to the west to the wherever, as in previous regimes. So I don't think it's a waste of time unless we did it with 20 or 30 guys at a time.
Well said. I think you talked me into it. Also, did Trey Patterson or Jordan Longino have the ability to take an official visit, given the issues with COVID? I don't know. I don't know the answer of that, but certainly if you're recruiting an out-of-state kid and they can't set foot on our campus, that's an issue, because who doesn't fall in love with Bloomington? Get them on there, let them see the banners, everything that we have going. So that might be another issue, but we wish Jordan Longino luck at Villanova. Last thing I wanted to cover with you guys, and this will kind of begin our conversation about Archie Miller, but I don't know if you saw our friends over at Inside the Hall had a piece they ran called What Are Realistic Expectations for Archie Miller? And Alex talked to Pat Forty, Mike DeCourcy, and Rob Doster just about Archie Miller's tenure so far. Asked him a few questions. One of the questions was, how would you characterize Archie's tenure so far? Forty basically said underwhelming. DeCourcy said fine. And Doster said underwhelming but trending positively. So kind of a mixture of the two. He asked them, when is it fair for fans to start judging? They all said now, that the 4th season of a coach's tenure is when you can really start judging wins and losses. And then what are realistic expectations for this season? 40 said they should be high, top third of the Big Ten. DeCourcy said somewhere in the top 5 or 6 in the Big Ten. And Doster said, without specifying exactly where in the Big Ten, said they should be a team around the top 25, maybe that bounces in. If they win both their games that week, bounces out. If they lose both, but kind of hovering right there around top 25, others receiving votes. Coach, was there anything in there that you particularly agreed with or disagreed with from those esteemed basketball minds?
No, I think all of those comments are fair. I'm always going to go with DeCourcy, because after talking to him a few times on Banner Monday, he's just an incredible guy with an incredible mind that sees beyond things that normal fans or people who follow teams see. And I think he's just a great resource, and I think he looks deeper into things. I think where Archie, and we'll talk about this in the next segment, is the things that people see are wins and losses, and he has been underwhelming in wins and losses. That is the absolute truth. But there have been a lot of foundational things that we'll talk about that he has been overwhelming and done a really nice job that sets up success. Now he's just going to have to go finish. So I think the underwhelming, all of that is probably very accurate.
Andy, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was interesting, not really surprising, and I don't disagree with it, but the when is it fair to start judging him, for them all to say now? And I think most of us would tend to agree with that, but it's just kind of interesting because you didn't really get to figure out what last year could have become. I mean, every time Archie's talked to anybody, he's talked about how good he was feeling about the team at that point at the end of the season, and thought they could have made a little bit of noise if they had gotten to the tournament, but you don't have that. So you go in, and I think this, just because all the prior excuses in terms of these aren't your players, or you had this rebuilding to do, Can you win with a Devontae? Can you win with the Justin Smith? Can you do those things? Whether those are fair criticisms or not, like those things are all gone. You've got Al as the Korean recruit, but I think most people, have a really high opinion of him from a character standpoint, from a leadership standpoint, and all that. So you don't have some of those other distractions. So I think in that regard, it's completely fair to really look at that. And I think the initial comments around how they'd characterize the time fall in well with what Jeff Goodman said when he was on with Alex. And then we talked about that a little bit last week, either on the show or between segments, but where he had just said it'd been steady, but not, it hasn't accelerated as quickly as even he would have thought. And I think that all, underscores it pretty well. I think there's something to be said for having a pretty good consensus on all three questions, really.
Yeah. And Goodman said too that, it wasn't as easy as people thought for Archie, that what he was left was not in good shape, which is one of the first times I've heard a national guy really dig into what we have been discussing for a while here since Archie Miller took over. So that to me solidified it wasn't just us looking for things, to find reasons why things weren't going well, that there's a national guy that kind of said, you know what, he wasn't really left in a really good situation. And you hear a lot of comparisons to other first, second, third year coaches who've had a little bit more success. Well, all situations have been different. I'm sure we'll get into that in a little more detail, but that Goodman interview was really, really solid that over there at Inside the Hall.
Yeah, that was definitely a good one. All right, coming up, it is time to talk more about Archie Miller. He's now had 3 years on the job. How do we grade him on each major element of the job, and what grade do we give him overall? We will discuss that and more next here on the Assembly Call. Stick with us. All righty. Well, hello to everybody out there live. Good to see so many of you here. I'm glad people didn't run and not come when I said that I was going to be back. That does make me feel good. That makes me feel good. Okay, so I figured I should explain my absence just a little bit because it kind of all happened quickly, and I don't know if you guys spent a whole lot of time explaining it. But I figured I should at least share why I haven't been here. We've had a few changes in our family, but some good ones. So, and this is not really for like public consumption, even though this is go on the podcast and go to the YouTube folks. But this is like family. Not putting it out on the radio. But my wife and I have been going through IVF, which is a very, very challenging process, and so it's kind of changed up our evenings because you got to do like shots and like all this stuff, and then. Without getting into too many of the details, and she can't like pick my daughter up, and she's really tired and all this stuff. So I've been doing bedtime stuff, and so it's just made being here for the 8 o'clock show really difficult. As you guys know, I've been able to be in the community and do the run sheets and stuff. So I haven't just totally checked out, but it's just made being here at 8 o'clock really tough. And that may continue some. So I don't think I'll be here regularly every single week. We'll probably have to rotate it like we do. But so far, fingers crossed, everything's going really well. And it's obviously a very strange, challenging time to be going through this process. But so far, everything's going well. So I don't want to spike the football or jinx anything early in the process. But the early returns are very good. And I really appreciate you guys stepping up and allowing me to do what I need to do here in the evenings because it's made things a lot easier, a lot more manageable. So I appreciate you guys for that. And I'll keep you guys posted. I'm definitely going to be here as much as I can. But it's it may just have to be kind of a weekly thing, and eventually we'll get Ryan hosting. Do I have a laugh
everything
track?
You said up right up until that last sentence was completely.
Yes.
I bought into every last bit of it until that last part. No, we're happy to help, and even happier to report that we did not spread any kind of rumors or tell any fabrications about why you weren't around. So
you definitely had the opportunity.
we did.
You did. Okay. So we'll talk Archie next. Man, there's actually sports on. It kind of took me by surprise that the baseball opening day was happening. I'd kind of just not been paying attention and just kind of assuming everything was going to get delayed. But there's sports. Wait, what happened to Moose?
He's getting married.
Yeah, I know he's getting married, but didn't we all know that? Or, okay, so is someone congratulating him that didn't know that?
Yeah, he had to have pre-marriage counseling, and he moved it to Wednesday instead of Thursday so he wouldn't have to miss the show.
See, is he trying to one-up me here? Is he trying to say that he's dedicated? I see what you're saying, Moose. I see what you're saying. Uh-oh, Megan's saying we should talk. It's not good when the person who helps you with your taxes puts a cryptic "we should talk" message into the chat. That's a concern. That is a concern.
Man, I tell you what, our ladies in the chat mob are just fantastic. Our dudes are okay, too. Don't get me wrong, guys, out there in the chat mob. But our ladies in the chat mob, they are just top-notch.
They are the best. They are the best. Okay, good. Megan Knott's okay. She's probably just saying that so that I'm not preoccupied the whole show. You actually owe $40,000 more than what we talked about.
There's never a good time to find that out.
No. But if you're going to, you might as well just drop.
But certainly during the middle of the show is right up there.
Okay, let's talk Archie. So that first segment was 17 minutes and 13 seconds. So we've got some time. Did Jay send in? Oh yeah, he did. Okay, so we've got a mediocre question from Jay too for segment 3. Okay, let's hop in. We'll start here in about 20 seconds.
Hi, this is AJ Moye. What's the only thing better than upsetting Duke in the Sweet 16? Celebrating it with friends afterwards. Join Jerod, Andy, Ryan, and Coach for the assembly call after every IU basketball game. Go Hoosiers.
Thank you, AJ. Welcome back to the Assembly Call. You can find all of our content at our website, assemblycall.com. And if you ever want to join the chat mob during our unedited live broadcast,
chat mobbers,
or you want to watch those replays and see all of the between segment banter, then check out our YouTube channel, youtube.com/assemblycall. I'm Jerod Morse. I'm here with Andy Bottoms and the coach Brian Tonsoni. And guys, we have gone through all the players. We've gone through all the recruits. That means that there is only one person left to talk about, unless we're going to dive into like assistants and managers and and really go deep here, which, hey, if this COVID thing lasts long enough, we may have
I don't think we
that.
can I don't think we can completely rule that out at this point, but
it is time to talk about Archie Miller and to basically grade, not just obviously last season, but his entire body of work at Indiana, which has now spanned 3 seasons. And, some of the obvious positives are the in-state recruiting. Indiana's adjusted defensive metrics have improved each season. He's beaten Tom Izzo 3 straight times, which is, nothing to turn your nose up at. But the negatives, the offense has felt stuck in the mud. To a certain extent, he is stubbornly stuck with his system, which can be a virtue on one hand, but on the other hand, he hasn't really adjusted to the talent that he's had on hand, and he's lost to Matt Painter every time, which kind of cancels out the Tom Izzo thing. So there's been some good, there's been some bad. And, one thing we should do, I think, before we begin this is just set the parameters for the discussion. We talked about this a little bit before the show started. Last season when we did this, the criteria that we used to judge Archie was on-court success, culture, recruiting, program ambassadorship, and staff management. And I think if you're Scott Dolson, those are probably the criteria that you want to use. Our issue, I think, as I kind of look at this and reflecting back on our conversation from last year, is can we really assess culture and staff management without being on the inside? Like, we could kind of bloviate about some stuff and talk about some really high-level observations we've made from afar, but I don't want to waste everybody's time talking about stuff that we don't have a lot of inside knowledge about. So, to me, those are a couple that I'd kind of like to, and maybe we can talk about them real quick, stuff that we do think we know, but I don't want to really enter them into our official criteria for grading Archie, because I just don't think that we're qualified to give a good grade on it. Do you agree, disagree, and what are some things about either of those two criteria, Coach, you can start, that you think you have noticed?
Well, you had a change of the coach, assistant coach situation, so you always wonder what goes on there. But to me, you got to have right fits. So that could have been a situation where that wasn't a good fit and he had to move on. A lot was blown out of a proportion of some of the sideline stuff that went on that was caught on camera. Good staffs work together and they converse and they even fight together. So you don't know what's behind that. You could read that negative one way, positive the other way, and that's why you need to be there in order to tell. The culture things for me, there's some clues. Was he worried about, playing all 11 guys at the beginning of the season to make sure that everyone was happy? How did that go? That fits into culture, but yet we don't know if the guys are getting along in the locker room and doing those kinds of things. So I think those things are important. I do think that, Dolson does need to look at those things, but you're in there watching practice, you're talking to the guys, you're seeing how they react. You can get a sense if things are going well or not going well, more from the inside than the outside. But I do think there are some tells. And I think, in those two areas, they've been all right. They haven't been maybe great, but they haven't been really poor either, in my opinion.
Andy, do you have thoughts on either of those before we move on to the official criteria?
I think the staff stuff is hard to get into. We can certainly talk about what we like about Mike Roberts. I think that probably is a net positive. It certainly is for coaches, we know, but
the yelling, the stomping.
Yeah. I mean, everybody needs a little bit more of that, but I think it's to the extent that people value having an IU guy there. And even hearing, his interview with the hysterics and some of that, that it means a lot to him. And I think that it's good in some ways to see that Archie wasn't afraid to make a change if he thought that something wasn't going the direction that he wanted. But again, I don't know that that's fair to, kind of grade on that. And, culturally, I think you continue to see his identity be present a little bit more. And that's been a gradual process. It felt a little bit like last year's team got along a little bit better, or you didn't hear some of the same rumblings off the court as you did the year before. But again, that's all trying to connect dots that we really don't have a lot of visibility to. So I'm generally okay with not putting a ton of weight on those things.
So the way that I feel like we should look at it is results, offense, defense, roster management, which obviously includes recruiting, and then program ambassadorship. Because that's all stuff that we can see, we can assess, we can look at. And of course, there's the question of, do you grade on a curve, or do you just grade what's happened? And I think we can start that looking at the results. Because the bottom line results are that Indiana is 55-43 in Archie's 3 years, 26-32 in the Big Ten. The Hoosiers have finished tied for 6th, 9th, and tied for 10th, and that's gone down each year, although you have to look at the context of how good the Big Ten was in each of those seasons. And while we all think that Indiana would have made the NCAA tournament, again, the bottom line is Archie has not yet coached an NCAA tournament game with Indiana. So I look at those in terms of results, and if you don't grade it on a curve, if you just look at it in terms of what's expected at Indiana, I mean, that's a D at best, right? I mean, what do you guys think? There's extenuating circumstances, but, it is what it is after 3 seasons.
Yeah, I think that maybe the larger part of that is, in some ways, the lack of progression. It'd be one thing if you were that record and I'm not even going to attempt to do this math, but if you were, 4-14 the first year and you dug yourself a hole from a record standpoint, you're gradually climbing your way out. But you went from 9-9 to 8-12 to 9-11. Big Ten these last couple of years has been extremely tough. Put a lot of teams in the tournament, or would have put a lot of teams in the tournament last year. So that's there. But I think that probably is the expectation every year from a Big Ten standpoint. And then, on top of that, you're 1-2 in the Big Ten tournament. So you're even another game below 500 at that point. So I think it's hard to, no matter what the context, look at the results and not see the progression of going from, 8-10 to, or I guess there's, 20 games now, but if you were 8-12 and then you got to 9-11 and then you got to 10-10, you'd still be under 500. But even that is incremental progress year over year. And that's really what you haven't seen. I think if you looked at road record over that time, that's continued to be a big issue, which it is for a lot of people in the conference. But yeah, I mean, it's when push comes to shove, the stuff that really matters is going to be the results. So it's hard to sugarcoat those and make them look a whole lot better than they really are.
Coach?
Yeah, you get paid to win games. And at Indiana, you need to win a lot of games. And that hasn't happened in the first 3 years. And so just by sheer number, that grade has to be low. But like any statistic, there's information behind the statistic. And regardless, in 3 years, there have been more wins. It's small and not Indiana, kind of wins. But he started out and each year has won more games and made the NCAA tournament in all likelihood his third year. But, you got to win games, and you can't go on losing 11 out of 12 games and losing 4 games in a row after you start 5-3 in the Big Ten. Those things have to, all the other things that are happening that are reasons for that have to go away, and he has to find a way to overcome that if they show again. And so pure record-wise, that's where the underwhelming part of the program comes from is game night performance, and especially, as Andy said, the road performance where there's been big defeats and no-shows at times. That has to change, and that has to change in a hurry.
And I think more than that, it's just, and Coach, you talked about this. It's some of it is the inconsistency of you kind of feel like you're turning a corner and then you backslide for a handful of games. And I think that, maybe even more so than the year-to-year record progression. It's even like during the season, you don't feel like you see that as much where, how much is this team really improving, or is a 3-game losing streak right around the corner because they just go into a funk for a period of time and they're not able to consistently work their way out of those situations and that part of it. So I think the consistency is a big factor as well that you alluded to.
There's 2 factors. One, the coach should be able to get players on his team to rise to a level to stop those streaks. But there's also an argument to say that you can do everything you want as a coach, but sometimes the players that you have, and that'll go to the next criteria, the roster management thing, that the players you have can't avoid those streaks at times too. And that's a tough call. As a coach, we know when we have a program, we know what our expected wins are like. We play game by game, but you look at a season, like we have these many teams we can beat and so forth. And then you try to overachieve on that. But if the fans are wanting 18 wins, from a high school program every year in a rebuilding situation, that's where it's a little bit messy. But ultimately, the coach is responsible, and I think Archie takes responsibility for that. He said in one of the interviews that the losses just eat him up, and I don't think there's any coach that will say differently, but you at least like to hear your coach say that the losses just bother him, and he needs to make sure that he takes those losses and constructively handles those both at home and with the team, and that's part of that. And the more I'm around Archie, the more the change from Dayton to Indiana was a big change for him, as opposed in some other scenarios, especially with the change in styles. It would be easier if he followed a guy that was more of his style. I think the transition would have been a lot easier. But yeah, all of those things are excuses. Are reasons, but there's no excuse. You got to win games. You got to deal with what you have. And I don't think game night he has done everything that he needs to at this point.
So I take it you guys are generally buying the D for results. That's a fair grade for results, not overall, but just in terms of on-court results.
I may say C-.
You
because
softy. You softy.
Thank you.
I love Archie Miller. You're welcome, Arch.
Okay, so let's talk about happier things. Let's talk about roster management, which has not been all perfect, but certainly the single biggest thing Archie needed to do when he came in was repair the relationships in Indiana, get that recruiting pipeline going, and he has. Not totally perfectly, because we didn't land Keon Brooks, right? But pretty much everything that he could do, he has done. Getting Lander, getting Romeo, getting Trace Jackson Davis, obviously then getting a bunch of 4-star guys like Armand and Rob and some of these guys. He's really done a good job with that. And I think he's done a good job of going out of state and getting guys who are solid players who fit the culture that have just had these star-crossed careers like Race Thompson and Jerome Hunter. Now, he swung and missed on some big names, as we've talked about, but I think for the most part, the recruiting aspect has been good. The 2 issues that I think have been struggles are that, for 2 years, we haven't really had an answer at point guard. Rob Finney, even when he was recruited, he's a guy we had high expectations for, but I think a lot of people thought he would really emerge as a junior and senior. We're about to get there with him, but obviously he's been up and down early on. There hasn't been a solid answer at the point guard position, not for lack of trying. Archie's recruited a lot of those guys, just hasn't landed them, and shooting has been a big issue, both from a development standpoint and from a recruiting standpoint. So to me, I don't think you can look at it as perfect. There have been holes. But I also think, bringing in a guy like Joey Brunk, while he didn't fit the style Archie wanted to play, he fit the culture Archie was trying to build. And so I think that's a net positive, even if Joey had his ups and downs, as a player. So I think some of those decisions show the kind of program that Archie's trying to build and the kind of roster that he's trying to build, and I buy into those. So for me, roster management-wise, I give him a B+. I think given what he had when he came in, he's done a really good job of reconstructing it in his own image, but it kind of feels like there have been some holes along the way that could have led to better results, the D that we just talked about, if he'd been able to maybe land a guy here or there or manage it a little bit better. I'm mostly happy, but I can't go all the way to an A because I feel like if it was an A, then the results would be better. So I give a B+. I think you could, argue a B or even a B-, but I'm going to try and be optimistic on this one, give him a B+, because I'm generally very optimistic about the direction that the roster management is taking. Andy, what do you think about it?
Yeah, I think that's fair. If you look at, again, even what we talked about at the beginning, I mean, he really set out to say, hey, we're going to get back to recruiting the state really well. They've done that. Have been able to pick a couple of guys out here and there from states nearby in the Midwest in general. And so I think that part is really good. And I think a little bit of that even flows into the program ambassador piece that is yet to talk about. So I think that's good. I think guys who have left, you're not having to squint too much necessarily to figure out why, a guy like Demezi leaving, it makes complete sense. And you all kind of said after the fact, it was right for him to recruit him and it was right for him to leave, and no hard feelings either way. I think the Justin Smith thing always felt like an odd marriage for a while. So I don't think that, you're not having these mass exodus of guys that you can't really explain why they would leave other than just general unhappiness and things like that. And I think you've also gotten to a point, and this speaks a little bit to the culture and identity stuff, is, we end up saying a lot of the same things about the guys that he really goes hard after and the characteristic he's looking for. I think he's really laid that out well. It's kind of fun. I was listening to the 3-Man Weave podcast earlier today, and they were talking about a guy that committed to Florida State, and they, talked about the attributes where it's like, yep, this is a Florida State guy. It makes complete sense why he would go there. And so I think he's starting to define that for IU, which goes a long way toward developing an actual program and really getting continuity there. So I think those things are a positive. But yeah, you can't look past the fact that there have been essentially the same deficiencies on the team for the last couple of years, and for whatever reason haven't been able to find guys who can shoot and space the floor and do that. Has gone the grad transfer route a little bit with Fitzner and with Joey Brunk, obviously two very different players from how their games are, and has gone after other guys. But yeah, I think you can't get a pass completely on the thing that's held this team back is offense, and the same holes have really been there for a couple years. So I think your B+ is probably fair here, with the recruiting piece of it really pushing it up and some of the other holes from that pulling it down a bit.
Coach, argue for why Archie deserves an A+, triple plus for his roster.
No, I'm actually going to go lower.
Whoa!
Because I think for recruiting an A, I mean, he's building, if you're talking about building a roster, an A. I mean, he came in, he said he's going to go inside out. He's doing that. He's coming close to a lot of guys that are outside of Indiana that are really good players. I could not have wanted more from a recruiting standpoint. And I think ultimately that's what's going to help him survive these 3 years, 4 years, is that he is building, and people will have to give him some time. I think Dolson will give him some time if the results don't matter. But I also understand, I'm going to give him a B, and I understand why. It's hard to coach guys that aren't your type of players, that match your personality, your grit, your determination, but they have some talent. So the reason I'm downgrading from a B+ to a B is what might have been best is to maybe push some guys to leave earlier that didn't fit Archie's mode, but that's going to make the results even lower. You're likely to lose some games because you're chasing some talented, but maybe not your type of guys away from the program. You have APR issues. You have that. So I honestly was a little disappointed that we hung around with some guys and trying to be respectful to everyone who played for Indiana, that I don't think really had Indiana first. And do you get rid of them early, or do you try to change them? And a lot of coaches believe they can come in and work with them and change them. And that's part of the criticism is I think playing 11 guys is hard. And I commend him for doing that. So it's a praise of him to trying to keep everyone happy to play 11 guys at the beginning of the first half of the season. But I think that might have cost him some wins. I praise him for saying that he said in one of the interviews, I think in The Athletic, that I don't like saying wait till my guys, because once I'm here, they're all my guys. I think that's awesome. And I think that he has to get credit for believing that. But I think it made things harder. And I think that's an absolute truth, that it made playing time and some of the decisions made, and that hurt the results. So I think he did the right things, but I don't think he gets an excellent grade because they didn't work out. And whether he didn't have the right message or the players didn't listen, some of those players. But again, he was handed some cards that weren't very good, and he tried really hard to do some right things, and some things may have worked and some things didn't. But I give him a B for roster management in total.
All right, so we're going a little long in this segment. We'll talk about offense, defense, and program ambassadorship on the podcast for the folks that are listening on the radio. But for the rest of this segment, let's give the overall grade. And so you can kind of take into account all of that stuff. We've gone with about a D for the results, for the roster management, B+, B. Coach, what do you give Archie overall so far?
I'm going to fall with, because all the metrics moved up. Offense moved up slightly. Defense really moved up, and we have a defensive mindset, and I don't think it's still there. So I'm going to stay at the B overall because I think the foundational pieces were really tough, and I think he's doing the right things, just not winning games. I think that changes this year.
But see, I can't get to a B, because to me a B is at Indiana, not trying to grade him on a curve, but just like what should a B be at Indiana? You should be in the top 4 or 5 of the Big Ten and making the NCAA tournament every year. If you're an A at Indiana, you're making the Sweet 16 and going to a Final Four every 4 or 5 years and winning Big Ten titles, and he hasn't gotten there yet. And so to me, the results drag everything down. And even though I'm optimistic about the defensive mindset, I think that's getting there. I like the direction that the roster management is taken. Program ambassadorship, that's never going to be Archie's strength. I got to go C-, and I feel like it could be a little bit lower just based on the results. And that's not a reflection of what I believe will happen moving forward. It's just simply looking back. I have a real hard time going higher than that, just given the results that we've seen. And, look, he's dealt with some bad luck. The one season when he had 2 bona fide NBA guys on his team, everybody else on the roster got hurt. That team had a chance to be really good, and the whole thing cratered, and he lost 12 out of 13, and it turned into a disaster. It could have been a lot better if things fall differently, but they didn't. And so if you look at what has happened, I got to go C-. Andy, where are you?
Yeah, I'd probably fall in the C, maybe C+ range. I think it's just been kind of middle of the road. I think even if you look back at the stuff we talked about, where it's all been kind of generally underwhelming, but trending in the right direction, it's, some of the defensive numbers have continued to steadily get better every year. I think that's a positive. You start to see an identity, but it's at a certain point, it's hard to say that a guy we all agreed is kind of like now is really the time that he's going to get judged harshly on that. If you're already at that point in year 4, I struggled to say, hey, you're going to get a good grade, because I think at that point you're not still having those conversations of like, are we sure this is it? So I'll say C, maybe C+ on the very high side if you look past some of those things. But I think the results are ultimately, these aren't all in equal weight in a lot of ways, and the results are the anchor that kind of pulls everything else down.
And I'm just operating, I think the program's in better shape than the last 3 years of the Crean administration. And you would probably, if you went to Crean overall from where he started and won 2 Big Ten championships, his grade would be a lot higher. But we all know why he was asked to leave, that the up and down nature. And in order to smooth things out and stabilize, I think Archie has stabilized. Now, he needs to win games in order to continue to be able to coach at Indiana. And he can stabilize all he wants and bring in Indiana guys all he wants. But if he doesn't win this year and the next year, it's going to be a problem. So the results do matter, but the results aren't happening without what he's done with some other things. So I can move down a little bit from that B. I understand you guys' point, but I don't think he's below average. I think average or slightly above average is where I could settle, because I think he has a plan. And I go back to Scott Dolson. Dolson came in and said, I like him because he has a plan. That sure beats a lot of coaches that are around. And it seems like with the recruiting and stuff that he has executed that He's got to get a better handle on rotations and some of those things we'll talk later. But that's where I'm coming to. He's stabilized the program, in my opinion.
If you do ever get an interview with Archie, he's probably going to demand to only do it with Coach and just have the rest of us be off.
Dang straight.
Be off air that day. Okay. Again, radio listeners, go check out the podcast. We'll give the rest of our assessment of Archie there. All right. But coming up in our third segment, we will answer your questions, including one about how the defense can actually improve this season without Justin Smith and what the European leagues do well that IU might consider adopting. All that and more. Stick with us here on the Assembly Call. All right, so that was 24:05. Okay, so let's hit the rest of this really quick. Let's start with offense. Andy, what grade do you give Archie for the offense?
Sorry, I'm on mute. I don't know. I struggle with this one. I mean, from a ranking perspective, it's gotten better, but from an actual raw numbers perspective, it's gotten worse.
It's not good.
Each of the few years. I just think it's not. I think it was Pat Forty that said this. It's like they're not really an enjoyable watch, which I think is fair. And I think there's been times when just really trying to figure out how to utilize the personnel that he does have, and again, maybe being a little bit too stubborn. I think he's even talked about that in one of the interviews of, you know, trying to be more flexible to what he wanted to do, and he thought so. Yeah, I don't think the lack of shooting. It's hard to kind of strip these apart from one another, because the lack of shooting is partly a roster management issue. So then it starts to become, well, do you get dinged twice because you didn't do a good enough job getting a shooter, and then by as a result of that, your offense wasn't very good because you couldn't get good spacing, you couldn't make shots from the outside. So yeah, I mean, I feel like that's another probably middle of the road C plus type thing for me. It just hasn't progressed. Haven't really seen different stuff be, haven't seen improvement, and there's very few areas you can really point to and say, hey, this got a lot better.
Yeah, it's, the offense really requires some nuance to look at, because it hasn't been good, but I'm not as down on the offense. I mean, I am down on the offense, because it hasn't been good. The shooting hasn't been good. There have been droughts. There's been a lack of creativity, all of that stuff. But, you can look at it and say, man, we're playing offense from the 80s. And I think to a certain extent, Archie has kind of adapted what he likes to do offensively to the personnel that he's had on hand. His strength has been inside, with Deron Davis and Trace Jackson Davis and Joey Brunk and Juwan Morgan. And so he's kind of oriented his offenses around that. And I think when you kind of look at it before each season, it's made some sense why he's done that, because he's had such a weakness at point guard. So I agree, Andy. I don't want to penalize him twice for the inability to get a point guard, because if you go back and look at his Dayton teams, he wants to play up tempo. He wants a point guard who can lead things and do more of the stuff that we're waiting to see, but he hasn't had the personnel to do it. And I thought we saw over the second half of last season a lot more creativity and a lot more willingness to run sets to get guys open for shots. He had a guy in Al Durham who was showing he could make shots, and he trusted him, and he ran offense to get him shots. I kind of wish we had been doing that all along, a little bit more to kind of help shooters. So, I would probably give the offense a C. The numbers haven't been good, but I at least felt over the second half of last season better about where the offense was going. And I also just feel like personnel-wise, he's had to run so many lineups out there with two shooters. How do you, what was the magic bullet to construct great offenses with that? I think there's more stuff we could have done. Probably should have run more pick and rolls with Romeo. There's stuff, but I don't know. I kind of feel like he's actually done an okay job with the roster he's had. And it really it's come down a little bit more to just having the dudes on offense. At some point, you got to have dudes on offense that can go get buckets and that can make shots. And we haven't had enough of those. So, that's where I give it a C. I'm just kind of middle of the road on it. There's been some bad stuff. There's been some good stuff. I think it comes down to roster management more than it does offensive coaching, though.
I agree with everything, but I'm going to give it a C minus. I really cringed when I heard that he was going to go to an old man game I totally understand why he did it, because that's where our strength was and our shooting wasn't there. And so you got to, again, I give him credit, but disagree, because I mean, we got more shots inside, but it just was stagnant. And you had to, in order to play a double post, it's got to be a little more stagnant, a little more slow paced till you get the, and then people are going to play defense and sag in and not guard the other post when he gets high-low. You got all that kind of stuff. I was hoping when he came from Dayton that we'd see more up-tempo earlier. And the question, and this is just a real difficult question, if you put that in and don't have the roster for it, you lose. And then you don't win 16. We already give him a D+ for going 17, 19, and 20. If he started out 10 and 15 because he's putting in a high up-tempo offense with a double-post team, then with
we're Josh Newkirk and Robert Johnson running it, I mean, those guys can't lead an up-tempo offense. It's just not
I know that, but you get your offense in, and then in the third year, I mean, or do you change every year based on what you have? So I think he just I'm a little disappointed in the tempo.
Okay. I want to amend one thing because Tyler had a good point, and let me get back to it. And he goes back to something that Deron Davis said on his Hoosier Hysterics interview, which is great, by the way. Highly recommend the Deron Davis episode of Hoosier Hysterics. But basically that, Crean really practiced working on skills. Archie is more about kind of conditioning. And this is, I'm going to amend it to a C+, because like when we talk about like kind of offensive coaching and scheme and all that stuff, I would stick with a C. Probably the biggest issue is the lack of development from a fundamental perspective. The lack of passing, the ball, some of the ball handling issues, like feeling like some of the basic stuff, the free throw shooting, we don't really get better at and kind of struggle at. And that does seem to be just kind of a program philosophical thing that I hope changes a little bit. Like it seems silly that John Beilein would run the passing drills that everybody talks about the first day of practice. Well, I don't know. Michigan seemed to run their stuff pretty well, and some stuff that you want to do, and we'll talk about this with the European stuff later. It's like, what do the European leagues do? Well, a lot of their guys are just really good fundamental players. They pass well, they dribble well, they know angles, they shoot well. Like that stuff really matters in basketball. And so you do hear enough from people who've kind of been inside the program and just watching it with your own eyes that you don't see a lot of fundamental progression. And, it's been 3 years now. So you do hope to kind of start to see that. And that goes in with some of the offensive lack of success that we've had. So I'm going to mend back a little bit what I said for that reason. Defense. This is obviously where the numbers are better. Archie is a defensive coach. He's certainly been hindered by not having the kind of big men that you would want to run his system in terms of Joey Brunk and Deron Davis, not the fleetest of foot guys. But he has stuck stubbornly with his pack line to get it installed, and we obviously hope now that it'll be better with personnel more well-suited to it. I think the defense, it's obviously been good, and it was so far down when he took over for Tom Crean that getting it up to where it was a top 30 defense in adjusted efficiency last year is certainly good. But if you look at the raw numbers in conference play, the picture is not quite so rosy. And so defense-wise, I'm going to go B-. The improvement's been good, especially from where he took it. But I'm not buying the defense quite as much as maybe the numbers, because the defense leaves this team at times when it really needs it. And part of that goes to the offense, I think, because the guys get frustrated and, the defense just doesn't, hasn't been as consistent. But I give him credit for changing the culture and making it a defensive culture. But I do wonder if he could have squeezed the orange a little bit more by finding some ways to adjust in certain ways to win some more games. And Coach, I don't know what the perfect balance is there between stubbornly sticking to your system and trying to adapt to the players that you have. But it felt to me like maybe there were some more wins to get if you do some of that. But I don't know if that sets you back moving forward.
No, I agree with you. The ball screen coverage, he held on too long through the Michigan game, and then he made some changes and was a little more flat in his coverage instead of the high hedge. You can be stubborn and just try to make guys do what you do, and I think he's admitted that he's stubborn on one of those recent interviews. So, yes, that is something that all coaches need to look in the mirror and make sure that they know when to pull the trigger and when not to pull the trigger. And, it is a fine line between, do you implement your system even if you don't have the players, or do you mesh your system to the players? I think in my situation in high school, you got to mesh to the players because you have new players all the time. You can't recruit. In college, I think you can recruit to the system. The question is, when you take over, do you need to win early or put in your system early? That's a real tough question. It would be a good question to ask coaches too. Is I think if you put in your system and don't have ball handlers, then it's going to look really ugly. If you don't, you could get some wins, but then you have a junior Rob Finney who's never played in the up-tempo system because he's tried to get the ball inside for a year or two. Now he's lost some experience in that. So, but the defense is, I think the defense is better, but I say B minus until you win more games. I don't think any category can, other than recruiting, maybe we can give him an A until the results are there. But again, you're a top 30, 32 defense, even with some of those mistakes of staying too long, you're still playing defense a little better. And I will say this, the team pouted a little too much. And is that the kids or is that Archie? Whoever it is, when they had bad offense, then you give up an 8-10 streak, and that's when the defense looked bad. That's got to end. That kind of streaks within games and within loss streaks. Whoever's responsible for that, and ultimately the coach is somewhat responsible for all of it.
Andy?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say B. The overall numbers, as you said, have consistently gotten better, and I think there's some good things to be had there, but they were middle of the pack in the Big Ten last year, and I think a lot of that has to do with that stubbornness of the ball screen stuff and trying to really putting guys in a position where they're almost destined to not be successful. With having Joey Brunk do that, he's not doing that he's not calling an audible and doing that on his own. At some point, you've got to understand what his limitations are and how you can adjust to still play the framework of what you're trying to accomplish, but not get people hung out to dry in some of these situations. So I think that one's there. That is, defense is one of the things he talked about in that interview with Seth Davis. It was being a stubborn SOB who wants to play man-to-man defense all the time. Could you do something else? And I think there were, do you have the athletes the length to play, to press a little bit? They would kind of dust that off every once in a while and things like that. But it was, really adamant about playing the, defense the way that he wanted to. And I think that has established hey, here's what we want to do, and really got that installed. And I think that part of it has become easier. But a little bit, it's a personnel thing and how you got to at least tweak it to do that. And I think more coaches are of the opinion that, they're going to really, stick with something defensively and that maybe is less fluid than what they would do on the offensive side. But at a certain point, you got to realize, hey, if you don't have the guys to do it, I think it was a 3-man weave guys talking about, West Virginia wanted to be Press Virginia, and then Javon Carter graduates, and it's like, oh, holy crap, this doesn't work without him harassing guys for 94 feet. And you got to be able to make some changes and figure out how to adjust based on what you got.
All right, so last thing, program ambassadorship. I don't think this is ever going to be Archie's strength, because I just don't think he's not the kind of charismatic guy that you see other top programs have. That said, I think he's done a great job in the state of Indiana. That's a big part of it. Rebuilding those relationships, rebuilding the trust of the high school coaches. I think one-on-one, he seems great. Everybody who talks to him, parents and high school coaches and all of that, it seems good. I'm disappointed personally that he hasn't given more attention to the local beat writers, not even necessarily our show, but guys like Inside the Hall and Zach Osterman, who have been on this beat for such a long time. It's fine if you want to go do an interview with Seth Davis, but I think you got to show some love to the local writers and get a little bit closer with the local fans, because that Seth Davis interview was fine, but it just sounded like it sounded like a networking thing, like Seth Davis kind of catching up, asking general questions. You kind of need someone who's there day in, day out to ask the good questions to Archie, to give us the stuff that we really want to know, and so the interview was fine, but there's so many more levels that we would like to go with a coach. And we obviously have the memory of, Bob Knight doing his chalk talks before games and all that stuff. I don't think Archie ever would do that, but how great would it be to just, have Archie do like what Bill Self did, watch some film and kind of go through it and be able to watch the game through his eyes. I think that stuff could really make a difference. And I think, you look at Tom Izzo and Mike Krzyzewski and Roy Williams and Bill Self and John Calipari and these coaches that are of programs of a stature that we want to be, those coaches have charisma to get attention and keep their teams are winning, but they themselves can make headlines. And Archie doesn't want that. And I think that's fine. And if he wins, that's all that's going to matter. But I do think there's kind of a next level of spotlight that you can bring to your program when the coach himself has some charisma and some salesmanship to him. And Archie's not going to have that. And so I think that's actually going to be a challenge that he's going to have to work around. Now, a lot of us are going to like that if we're winning, because it's like, this guy's no nonsense. All he cares about is winning. But, if you want to try and recruit and play on a national level, that could also hurt you a little bit in certain cases. So, I would probably give this a C+. I appreciate the fact that he straight talks in his post-game press conferences and, again, has rebuilt in Indiana. But I think there are to me some lingering concerns as Indiana looks to go from, bad to decent, decent to good, good to great, and great to elite, that there could be some challenges down the road. But those will all be erased if we're winning at an elite level, like I said. So those are just some of my thoughts on it. Andy, where do you fall there?
Yeah, this one's a hard one because I don't know how much unless he's way different than what he portrays in these situations, I don't know how much you're going to get him to be like some of those other guys. So it's like, how do you grade him?
You're not
on a, like, you know what I mean? Like, can you really say, well, you're not doing a good job, but it's not really in you to do, the things. Although you do need to be careful asking him to be like Bill Self. That could go right. But that's, I know what you meant, but just
right. No. Yes.
So I think that part is hard to like ding him a lot on. I like the more straightforward nature of it, but I do agree that some of the access that other reporters have to the programs that they cover, and some of those things that might give you a little bit more of a peek behind the curtain in terms of what some of those things are. I think you would like to see, but I just don't know that he is. Yeah, like I said, I just struggle to come up with a grade on that. That's not, kind of in the B minus type range. Cause it's like, I don't know that I have the expectation with him based on what you've seen from a personality standpoint that like, you're going to, all of a sudden he's going to come out and be something. And there's a part of that you like, that he's not really trying to be something that he's not and be the face of a program in a way that he doesn't believe in. So yeah, this is probably the one that I struggle the most to give a grade to, because I think from a former player standpoint, I think you've heard mostly good things. I think there's a couple folks who have said, they didn't feel like they'd been reached out to. But it does feel like there's been more of an effort to do that kind of thing. I think that means a lot to, some IU fans. And obviously the Bob Knight thing coming back, I don't know that he was, he's certainly not going to turn that down, but I also don't, he's not at the front championing that, because I don't know if that would have done anything. But this is kind of a hard one for me to really take a firm opinion, extremely high or low on.
It's like grading Deron Davis, defending in the pack line. It's like, well, this isn't really like what he's there. Like, I agree with you. It's not. You can't. I don't want Archie to try to be something he's not. So that. I totally agree with that sentiment. As Bear's Mouth says, he's going the Bill Belichick route. Yeah, a little bit. And if he's a genius and can win games, that's all that will matter, and it will be fine. But it's just, I don't think you're going to get any like benefits. Like Kentucky gets from Cal, just like being out there and doing his Cal things. And I don't want that. You know what I mean? But there is some kind of qualitative benefit that the Kentucky program gets from that. And I don't think it would matter until we get up to a level where we're in the top 10 every year, but I hope we get there. So I'm just kind of projecting forward. Anyway, Coach, your thoughts. I know you love Archie.
Well, there's a few things. One, disappointing is Indiana University is really tight with its media in all areas. And that fits Archie. I think Archie enjoys that. Now, some of the assistant ADs in their programs do allow softball and volleyball are going to Hoosier Heartland all the time and sending their players out. And I think that's awesome, to get some publicity for that. And I do think that kind of ambassadorship, you get paid as a head coach at major university. You got to do some of that. That's the one thing, right? Where he's got to be able to swallow what he wants to do and do some of that. He can't just be in his tunnel and do everything that he wants to do. But here's the other thing that I find really difficult now, being a member of the media, and a coach. as a coach, we don't like you media members. As a media member, I like you media members.
One step
like
above
those.
prostitution, right? Isn't that what
Yeah,
we're
and
out
I
there
like
doing?
Osterman, and I like all those guys, right? But as a coach, I don't like them. I'm not going to sugarcoat. I don't want to talk about my program to anyone except my players and my administrators. I don't want to talk to the parents. I don't want to talk to anybody about it. And then they're going to ask me some question about why I played a 2-3 zone on a out of bounds when they haven't even been in practice or watched a film. And I'm going to get all ticked, and then I'm going to get quoted, and then it's going to be a big mess. So
take that to the school board.
Yeah, it's just there's nothing worse than a post-game interview. And there just isn't, because it's coach speak for a reason, and no one likes coach speak, but you just say the things that are going to be softly heard in the paper, and you get the reporter out of your coaching office or in the media room. And that's just, I don't know if that's ever going to be fixed to some extent. And some people love to play the game and use the media for their advantage. And you name some of them, and they do a good job of it, especially the national guys and Ross Dean, who calls everyone and their buddy. Those national guys get guys on, and you wonder if they just go on there so they can be seen and heard. And so I was on this podcast for recruiting, and unfortunately the local guys who do a lot better job don't have that kind of reach, and then they don't get the thing. So that's unfair too.
You want the coach to use the national media to lift up the program, not himself, as we had a previous coach do, Right. And look, and Archie's still a young coach, and that may develop. He's never going to like it, clearly. I don't think he'll ever be comfortable with it, but he may learn some savvy ways to use the media to the program's advantage. I think that's an area that he could grow and evolve. So it's still.
I always loved the coach's show because there was free food. So I didn't have a problem talking to the local media because it was usually breakfast. But you have the local radio show for us at 9:00 in the morning. That's when we want to if we want to have practice or a walkthrough, then the head coach has to go himself and leave it to me, the assistant, or he sends me. It's just it's part of the job, but it is part of the job that is really, really, really tough. So I'm on both sides of the fence. I want more access, and then when I put my coaching hat on, I want no access. So I get it.
You are such a hypocrite on post-game shows, Coach. Coming on here, second-guessing coaches after games.
I know. I'm going to pay for it. I'm going to rot in hell, I think, in the coaching hell. I'm not going to make coaching heaven because I've turned tide.
Cognitive dissonance personified. Brian Tonsoni. All right. Dang, we haven't even done segment 3 yet. We should do that. That was a long conversation, though. Just to put a bow on this, I'm optimistic still. I've enjoyed. Well, I was going to say I've enjoyed the Archie Miller era so far. I don't know about that. There have been some. Enjoy is maybe not the right word to put on it. But after 3 years of the ups and downs, I am still optimistic, and I've still seen enough good to outweigh the bad, and to feel like we're on the right trajectory, and that we have a young coach who can still grow into the role and be really good. So I don't, I think it's easy to look at the last 3 years and pick out some negatives, and I think those are warranted. But I think you can still do that and say, you know what? But things are still trending up ever so slightly, but they're trending up. And I think this guy has more than what he's been able to show. And hopefully, as we get rosters that fit him better, he'll be able to show it. And I look forward to that.
And I just rest with, I think the program's been stabilized, and now it's time to win. You got to win now.
Yeah.
I mean, the now part of that discussion that started at segment 2 is all that's fine and dandy, but the wins haven't been there, and it's been underwhelming. I mean, the expectations were a lot higher coming in from him from Dayton. That's the truth. I think he would admit that as well. I think there's a lot of reasons why, but no excuses.
Andy, do you want to throw a bow on top of it?
I think we've probably talked about it enough. I don't know that I have anything. Anything new to say at this point?
It's a children's show.
Thanks, Archie.
Yeah, I mean, I thought Coach and I showed great restraint when not, lashing back about the bracketology comments. So,
you did.
I just think I think there's a lot of good things, and that if you look at them all individually as you break down some of these pieces, I think you can tell yourself a good story about a lot of parts of it. The challenges that hasn't added up to the results that people want to see. And we can cling to those small victories and little things here and there over the course of the few years. But, as everybody said, this really starts to be the year that the excuses are kind of gone. The incremental changes or shifts over the course of it has to be gone, and it really has to, really turn into something at this point. It seems like a lot of things point in the direction that it can, but you just need to see it.
Yep. Okay.
Quickly on the Sesame Street comment, I had no problem with it. I mean, I don't want to be asked about where I'm going to be seated after I lose a game if I'm a coach. I think maybe should have done different words.
Yeah, I think it was. I mean, I think he kind of addressed it where it's like, look, if you ask me questions after a game, you're going to get stuff like that sometimes. I agree. I would rather them do away with post-game press conferences and try and have another way to get quotes from coaches, because you probably get something more useful. So, anyway. Okay, let's do this final segment.
What's up, y'all? It's Devontae Green giving you the green light to watch Assembly Call after every IU game. Just don't listen to their opinions about shot selection. Remember, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Go Hoosiers.
Thank you, Devontae. Welcome back to the Assembly Call. I am Jerod Morse here with Andy Bottoms and the coach, Brian Tonsoni. Remember that you need to be subscribed to our email newsletter. We send out a weekly IU news roundup, even during the offseason. And after every game, once the games begin again, we send out a detailed post-game analysis. Just text IU to 66866 or go to assemblycall.com. That's IU to 66866. Or go to assemblycall.com. All right, guys, time for the mailbag. Most of these questions submitted via our private IU basketball discussion community, which you can learn more about at assemblycall.com/community. But some people, Jay, loves to send them on Twitter like 5 minutes before we go live with the show. He really, the entitlement that he is showing now that he has a segment named after him, it's really... I kind of hoped it had changed during my layoff, but clearly it is the same. But alas, we have the music, so we have to play the question. Here's the music.
It's not that good, but it's not that bad. It's Jay's mediocre question.
If there's one thing and one thing only you could change about the first 3 years of Archie's tenure, what would it be? And, Coach, you kind of hit on it, where it would be kind of interesting to see what would have happened if Archie had cleaned house a little bit earlier and tried to bring in some of his guys. Not that the contributions of those players isn't appreciated, but kind of seeing what that would have looked like to me is interesting. So that's number one. And seeing a healthy Jerome Hunter his entire freshman season to go along with Romeo and Juwan, and just better health for that entire team as a whole, if I could be so greedy as to ask for that. Those things, I'd love to see what would have happened there. A, out of curiosity, and B, because I think it probably would have ended up improving the bottom line.
I would say a little more disciplinarian when things weren't going away to bench players or to demand things. There was that Minnesota talk in year 2, and then, some things I think he tried too hard to make sure people were happy moving forward in his start at Indiana. That's a perception. I don't know if that's true or not, but I'd like to see a little more of the toughness that he was supposedly brought from be applied to the team.
Andy?
Yeah, I think a lot of what you guys said is good. A couple that stand out would be, these are more maybe game. One of these is game specific. What happens if they win that Ohio State game in the Big Ten tournament 2 years ago? They had started to get things together at that point, played pretty well down the stretch, and had some momentum. If they'd gotten that, would they have been able to make their way into the tournament? I think that changes a lot of the discussion about how important even last year was. And then, being able to play in the NCAA tournament last year, quite honestly, if you could change that, we'd all be a lot better off. But the circumstances surrounding that. But what really happens? Is he right that they had really developed some momentum? How does that change a legacy for a guy like Devontae or Duran to actually be able to play in that NCAA tournament? Would be kind of interesting. I think the injury stuff that he talked about was potentially another one. I was trying to think back. I just couldn't do it well enough to figure out if there was a recruit that had been missed on that would have solved a lot of the shooting woes during that time period, but I couldn't find a good resource to track that down. So I'm sure there was somebody.
Some point guards, some of those guys, if you get any one of them, it probably helps out. But
yeah.
Okay, next question. This one is from Ken. With the loss of Justin Smith, how can the defense improve this year? It's a fair question because Justin has obviously been one of Indiana's most impactful and versatile defensive players. But, we went over this a couple months ago, Andy. To me, the path for this happening is for Archie to be able to go back to the defensive profile he likes, which is a team that does not get a lot of offensive rebounds, but instead gets back in transition and gets set up. the profile for his teams at Indiana, because of how they've been situated with a lot of big athletes, you got to play to your strength. And so we've offensive rebounded pretty well, but I think that has hurt the pack line being able to get set up, get everybody in their spots. And so by removing Justin, you're going to have probably another shooter on the court and probably a guy who's not as good of an offensive rebounder as Justin. So you'll see that number go down. But I think you could see an impact on the defensive side of the ball where it's a little bit more like the profile of Archie's teams at Dayton and just kind of logically fits better with how a pack line defense is going to want to be played. So that, look, it's not to underestimate what you're going to lose with Justin, because I think despite some of his ups and downs, he was still a plus defensive player. But that to me is the path, just because of the rosters that you're going to play with and how they profile.
I think for me, it depends a lot on who starts to take up those minutes. If you see more time on the court where Race and Trace are out there, then I think you've got a really reasonable argument to be had there based on what we've seen from those guys. I think what you said is also true, that can you get a more offensive lineup out there that doesn't force you to do some of the things you've just trying to do anything you can to generate offense, which is the offensive rebounding piece. So I think to the extent that those minutes get allocated a lot more to a front court of Race and Trace, I think you can be more versatile there. Justin was a good defender, but was a little bit undersized at times when he was asked to play the 4. And maybe, you find some other guys that can really, step up. Can you play with a little more pace? Can you do some things to maybe force the other team to play at a pace that they don't want to play at versus IU playing a little bit slow, let everybody get comfortable and some of those things.
Coach?
I think smaller lineups will help too. There'll be more opportunity to play smaller this year. And I just think you make it up team-wise. It's a loss defensively, but you make it up team-wise by playing different people who want to get in there and do what Justin did well.
Yeah, and look, if Armand can get more minutes, he's going to be a good defensive player. Trey Galloway is a guy who's going to step in and play good defense. Race Thompson's a good defensive player. So, I mean, Indiana's going to – Jordan Geronimo profiles as a potentially good defensive player, although I don't know that he'll get there this year. But Indiana's got some pieces who can step in and help to fill that gap. Lastly, let's go with this from Patrick. Archie mentioned looking to Europe leagues and their offensive styles for new ideas. What types of things do those leagues do well? And I alluded to this earlier, Coach. To me, it's not even like styles and sets and that kind of stuff. It's fundamentals. A lot of those European players are known for being good passers, good ball handlers, good shooters, all those things. You add those fundamentals, you're going to make any offensive set look better. So I would take that into account even more than I would look at the style of play. But I'm sure there are some stylistic things. Just looking at what Indiana needs, it still seems like we need to get better at the fundamentals.
They're very good at passing and vision and dribbling, and then using that to run effective offense. But their spacing is tremendous in European leagues, to where it's hard to cover shooters and you move people into open spots. So if you're studying that, maybe to see some of that in Indiana's offense.
Yeah, and that interview with Seth Davis, Archie mentioned the kind of how hard the cuts are. I know that was one thing we talked about coming out of that Purdue game, where it was just like the difference in how hard different guys would go through cuts was pretty huge. And then the space, that's accentuated by the spacing that Coach talked about, and the ability to pass and find those guys. And I think for a team that needs to generate offense, can you do that by hard cuts, good screens, more, free flowing stuff is kind of what he talked about in the article. And it's been pretty non free flowing, I'd say, for IU.
Yep. That's it. We're done. No more questions.
Okay, well, that is going to do it for us on this week's edition of the Assembly Call. If you want to see us do the show live, join us at assemblycall.com on Thursday nights for the live broadcast of our Assembly Call radio recording. And don't forget to go to assemblycall.com or text IU to 66866 to join our free email newsletter. Special thank you to Bob Thompson for producing most of the music that you hear on the show, and thank you for listening. We will be back again to talk with you next Thursday night. Until then,
take it from me, AJ Moyer. Keep your elbows in, eyes on the rim, and go Hoosiers.
Thank everybody for coming out. All right, I got to get out of here, folks. Thank you.
I have a mad crush on Archie Miller. And
he does.
Hey, interesting you brought up the European stuff, and I'm not going to give out a whole lot of secrets, but we're studying a team from Jerusalem. Our Western offense is going to use a lot of things from a team in Jerusalem, and it's all about spacing and getting 4-on-3 and putting the defense in rotation and how to get them started in rotation and then swing the ball and attack the rotation. And we've only had 6 open gyms and only 2 that we could actually go 5-on-0 and do some of those things that you just didn't have a guy with the basketball. And it looks pretty good. But we have shooters for finally, and that's why we're going to it, because you want to guard this action, we got a guy this spot and this spot that can bang threes, and then we got a guy who can score inside. And so it's
basketball is so much more fun with shooters. Just
yeah, it is.
Okay, so last thing that we can talk about before we get out of here. I'm curious. If let's say that we did get an interview with Archie Miller, or like Podcast on the Brink gets an interview with Archie Miller, what questions would you want to ask him? To me, the number one question that I would want to ask Archie is, I know that the perfect answer is going to be both, but philosophically, does he think it's more important to recruit shooting or develop shooting? I would love to get his answer on that, to know where he falls on that. Because again, you have to do both, but I just kind of want to know what he thinks. Because I think he's going to say the former. I mean, he's going to say both, but to me, his philosophy seems like the former, and that's been part of the issue, is we haven't been able to recruit it, and we certainly haven't developed it that well. Al has, but not a lot of other guys have. So I would love to hear how he would actually answer that. I would love to nerd it out with him for an hour, just talking basketball concepts. The other question would be, when you look back at how many possessions were spent with Duran and Joey Brunk hedging ball screens, do you regret that? Or is that part of stubbornly sticking to your system that you think is going to pay off in the long run? Or was there something in there that we didn't see, that those possessions were actually better than we thought? And I'd love to get his answer on that too. Nerding out with him about that stuff I think would be a lot of fun. Are there any questions that you guys would want to ask him? And I'm not teasing anything. We haven't set anything up. We've been rejected every time we've asked. So I'm not trying to say that this is going to happen, but
certainly after the grading on tonight's episode.
Here's our grades. Do you agree or disagree with our grades?
I think we can pretty much fire the chances of that into the sun, but that's neither here nor there.
In areas that you got below a C, we expect a 2-page written response. Mine would be tactical because of the coaching. I want to know, how he teaches ball screens and what's he trying to get out of ball screens, because the high school game's going to some of that. I'd love to talk to him about overall strategy of the pack line. What's the most important thing to stop? And that'll lead to the ball screen hedge, because the reason you hedge is to stop the ball. And how do you make adjustments in that and so forth? Scouting, I'd ask the scouting question.
Joel said number one question would be why bench guys in the first half with 2 fouls. Yeah, I would definitely ask him that too.
Joel should really probably reset his password, since it's likely that you somehow acquired it and logged in as him to pose that question.
Andy, would you ask him, does he really think bracketology is a children's show? Archie, do you know how much time I spend putting these brackets together?
Yeah, my question would essentially be, what the hell, man? I mean, what do we, I think it'd be a little bit of, some of what he said about the stubbornness. What needs to happen for him to really change out of a certain thing, and some of that goes back to the ball screen piece, but it's, like what is the breaking point? And maybe some of the questions that we asked too, just it's a little bit philosophical of like, is it more important that you have your system in during this time period of really getting your guys in, or do you regret being stubborn with that and not trying to tweak more, and kind of what's the right balance, and how he views the balance of that, maybe how he viewed the balance of that when he came in versus how he views the balance of that now, a few years in. But I think that's been, to me, one of the things that's been most frustrating in some of those scenarios of trying to figure that out. And I'd also be curious, just from an analytical standpoint, like, what are some of the things that they really look at to make those kinds of decisions after the fact? We all kind of lament plus minus and different lineup stuff and different whatever, like how much of that do they really use versus how much of it is just kind of gut feel and stuff like that.
Yeah, Tyler said if he were 100% honest, who, if anyone, was a locker room cancer the last 3 years? See, I might, like, if Archie and I became friends and I was having beers with him, I might ask him that question, but I would not ask that on a podcast. I don't, that wouldn't be the place for any type of gotcha questions or trying to like put him on the spot. I would just want to talk hoops with him, philosophy and stuff that would help us all see the game better. And that's the stuff that I don't think we get in some of these interviews that with the questions people ask him.
the best questions from a coaching standpoint are, how do you determine this? What are your beliefs? What do you believe is the best aspect of your pack line defense? And then general things. If you have a criticism, be general. It's like, how long do you stay with a scheme that's not working? Coaches don't mind having conversations like that. They get a little defensive when it's like, you gave up 20 points on the pick and roll defense there. You think you should have changed? No shit. We should have changed,
Yeah.
We didn't. So yeah, that's bad. Now get out of my office. But you really got to be careful. Asking coaches questions in general is a lot better than saying, you know what, you didn't play Duran, but 7 minutes and he had 4 baskets. That's when we get a little defensive. Maybe we shouldn't. But
the last one I would ask is, I think it's difficult for the average fan to watch a defense and to know if it's being executed properly. So if he were going to coach Indiana fans on how to watch the pack line and to know if a possession went well or to know if there's been a mistake, what are like 1 or 2 keys that you look at to know if this is being done right or if it's being done wrong? Or if you see a guy who's running out and chasing a 3-pointer, what should we have been watching to know if that's his fault, if that's someone else's? Like, coach me on how to watch the defense to know what's going right and what's going wrong.
That's a good Coach's Corners segment.
There we go. By the way, your Coach's Corners have been awesome lately. If you guys haven't been watching those, he's done shot forms of Rob Finney, shot forms of Al Durham. I mean, really going deep on some of this stuff. So, Coach, hat tip to you.
Thank you.
Or hair curl flip to you, because that's been really... you guys can't see the almost mullet that's happening back here because I haven't gotten my hair cut in months. It doesn't come through when I wear the headphones. Thank goodness. Okay. Clearly, I'm just lingering because I missed having been on the show, and I don't want it to end. But we should probably close things up because it's getting late.
I gotta run.
It's getting late. Well, it's been good talking with you guys. I'll let
Andy,
you know
tell Jen to stay safe as school year approaches and whatever you guys are doing educationally over there.
Yeah, I will. You do the same. Yeah, we're getting close. A lot of to be determined questions from her perspective on how her district is going to execute their plan. So we shall see.
It's all up in the air. Wear your masks, social distance, keep doing all that stuff.
Yep.
Okay.
All right, cool. All right.
We'll see you guys.
We'll see you guys.
See y'all
Glad
next
to have
week.
you back, Jerod.
Good to be back.
All right.
See you, everybody.
Talk to everybody later. Stay safe.